Hello and welcome to this Island Life programme with me, Beth Espy. Now, this is taken from the I Love Mann podcast, which essentially is where I talk to people about why they love the Isle of Man. And you can find the full series on our website. You're going to hear now from Charles Gard, Rowan Henthorn, Graham Hall and first, Juan Christian.
One of the things that I'm super proud of the island and everybody that lives here, and me being part of it as a Manx person, is the community we have.
How would you describe it? I would say it's a little green jewel in the middle of a big blue sea. And it's just fabulous, isn't it?
I travelled to a lot of places, and I still think the Isle of Man is one of the most beautiful. It's a really, really special island, and especially underwater, it's magical.
Many stories of peculiar things happening on the Isle of Man, and our culture has arisen from that, and our legends and our language and our music is uniquely Manx. And for a tiny island of just now over 80,000 people, there aren't many places in the world that have what we've got.
When the summer day is over, its busy cares have flown, I will sing beneath the starlight with a weary heart alone.
Down Scarlet, it just feels like you're walking on another planet sometimes, with the lichens and, that harsh environment. I think that's my space. I love going to that coastal area, and our Radnafallen path is just... It's hard to find words for it, really, but it's incredibly... awe-inspiring, and I love seeing how it changes through the seasons.
The reason I came here, and the reason that I liked the idea of coming here, was because my father was posted in 1936 or 37 to Derby, and he spent a joyous year or two here and loved the place, and he would always talk well about it. I never came here with him because sadly he passed away, but when the decision came, where should we go that would be easier to live in, I thought, well, why don't we go and have a look? And when we got off the ferry, and it was springtime, and the daffodils were out, and the sky was blue, and we said, we're going no further than this. This is just the place to be.
I was born here. I'm 74, so I was born in 1951 in a little boarding house on the Prom. I've had really first-hand experience of what was our greatest industry for many years, tourist industry. A glorious little piece of land in the middle of the Irish Sea with fabulous history, wonderful natural resources, and my home.
One of the things about the Isle of Man is that I've found since I moved back is most people have 2 or 3 hats, constantly juggling maybe 2 jobs, or they're a chairperson of this thing, they're involved in this organisation. Nobody's lazy in the Isle of Man. We have this saying, this trade allure, but everybody is absolutely chocker. So the dedication that so many people put into the cause, and there's probably only a handful of people that could probably be classed as professional artists and musicians on the island. So most people who really, really are dedicated to, whether it be theatre, the Kensington Arts, or sound check, or anything, when they go out and they want to do their own there's hours and hours and hours of work and preparation and organisation for them to be able to do what they love. It doesn't put people off, does it?
I love the fact that, you might see on Facebook if someone's lost a phone or a wallet. I don't know if there's many places in the world. I often misplace things. My husband probably finds it quite irritating. I put things down and I just kind of walk off. But I know if I ever lose a phone or my wallet or anything, I just don't ever feel worried. I just think it will turn up. And I think that's a very unique thing. Yeah, I locked my car keys in my car the other day because my locking system broke, and I shouldn't be keeping my car keys in my car, and I won't anymore because I had to break into my own car. But, that's the beauty of living on a small island, I think. You can be very lax in that sense, and I think everybody deserves that. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their community.
We've got our own language. I mean, how extraordinary is it for a tiny island like this to have its own language? The Isle of Wight, I don't think, has that. Anglesey doesn't. This is extraordinary. We've got our own parliament, for the Isle of Man. And may I just say, we've got our own symphony orchestra as well, our own national symphony orchestra. And those are the 3 things that make me think the Isle of Man is unique in the world: a parliament, a language and a symphony orchestra. And with that, our own culture, our own legends, our own, as I say, language, and our own music. All right, it is a branch of Scottish and Irish, but it's become very distinct in its own way, and an extraordinary history of weird people doing weird things for the last 1,000 years, with the monks and the Earls of Derby and the Dukes of Atholl and the Vikings, all these people who've come here and left a stamp on us. It's absolutely fascinating. It's uniquely Manx. It has definitely got a unique Manx flavour. And for a tiny island of just now over 80,000 people, there aren't many places in the world that have what we've got.
What's your favourite piece of Manx music?
Oh, well, I think 2 or 3 of the Manx folk songs, certainly. The Sheep Under the Snow is very, very haunting. And Oren Gelby, which was a strange piece of music collected from Niarbel, with a legend of a man in a boat way out at sea. It's actually, I think, a variation of medieval plain chant. It's come down over hundreds of years, thousands of generations, and it's very, very haunting. Always reminds me of the Isle of Man.
Spending years on the sea, which we did, we spent 17 years researching the basking sharks, and the sea around here is quite a remarkable place. You can be out one moment and it's calm and peaceful, and within a minute you're surrounded in a thick fog, you can't see anything. Or you can be around the other side of the island, the tide switches round, and to get back home it's really difficult, with such a big sea running. And I think that's another thing that makes the island great, is that it has a giant moat around it, which kind of, in some ways it's isolating, but in some ways it's also a protection, isn't it? It protects us from too many sudden shocks, I guess. Do you wave at the fairies? Well, of course you do, because why wouldn't you? It's a safe insurance policy. And I love it. I got a book this last year on folklore of the island, and it's fascinating, isn't it? And of course, we've also got great archaeology here too, and there's a great story to be told. It goes back and back, doesn't it? I think, did I hear right that when they excavated the airport runway extension, that they found the oldest habitation in the British Isles? It's not bad, is it, really?
If you walk from Glenchas all the way around there, you can get to Niarbel, or you pick any part of that section from the Sound all the way up through Fleshick, Concanary, Latnabennia, the South Broad. Honest to God, I think it's unmatched on the planet. When the sun's right and it's clear as a daisy and the heather's out and the gorse is out. We were cycling through, went to Lagna Killy a couple of weeks ago and seen a kite, like a red kite. Just there. What a place we live in.
Island life, get that all over the world, don't you? That islands move at a different pace. And I wonder what that's about, really. Because in the UK you have small towns and villages. Maybe they move slowly as well. But yeah, I love that kind of slower pace of life. And I think it's the answer to a lot of the challenges that we have in relation to our consumption. If you live slower and more mindfully and enjoy what's on your doorstep, you kind of don't need as much or to consume as much. And I think the Isle of Man provides a real gift in that sense, because we've got the most gorgeous beaches and glens and hills in which to walk and enjoy. And I love at the weekends when you see everybody out and about and enjoying nature and what's to offer. And I think, that's the benefit of really looking after after nature. It provides all these wonderful experiences for us.
I can't imagine what that feels like to actually be permanently living, if you were born here, off the island. Obviously, people can cope with it. I couldn't. I actually remember I was living in Dublin for 4 years. I was studying the harp with a very fine harp teacher there. And on the last return to Dublin, I was on the steam packet boat in floods of tears. I thought, I can't stand this anymore. So I decided that would be my last few months in Ireland. I applied for jobs on the Isle of Man. There was a job going as the manager of the Gaiety Theatre, which I applied for, and it was in the purview of the chairman of the Arts Council, Major Geoffrey Crellin, and apparently he said, well, what does Charles Gard know about managing theatres? Which was a very good question, and the answer was nothing. But then a job came up here at Manx Radio, and I started here in 1977 as head of religious programming, and the rest is history.
I had my sons in London. I hurt my back doing some lift. I was lifting like a thing called a keggerate, and I had a bit of sciatica, and I ruptured a couple of discs, herniated some discs in my back, and I spent like a whole summer in bed. And when you hurt your back, your mental health goes. You feel pretty pathetic. You feel sorry for yourself. And it kind of shifted a few things into perspective. And about 4 years before that, my mum died. And I always kind of carried this weight of guilt that I was never here for my sisters, and it was always at the back of my mind. And I always thought, I'll come back, I'll have maybe 5 more years. And then I was working for a beer distributor called Cave Direct. My livelihood there was selling craft beer to pubs, and before that I was running and opening craft beer venues. And I started to sell beer to Chris Griffiths at Bottle Monkey and Ian and Mary Beth down at Forage and Vintners. So I was coming over a little bit more, and my dad started getting unwell, and I could see him getting older, and things weren't really working out as I thought they would be in London. And then just talking to mates, and I mentioned to Hugo Mackenzie once, he's like, well, what do you need? And I was like, a pub. And like an hour later I had someone on the phone to me, and it was literally like that. Yeah. And then a lot of help, and I relocated back. And it's hard, because there is aspects of family life that really needed to run their course, and you sometimes you have this great glorious idea that everything is going to be fine, but there's always something. So it hasn't been without its low points, but it was the right decision. Ultimately I was the right age to come back. Compton Vaults I'm very proud of Compton Vaults, and it was short and sweet, and my son does love it over here. I've got 4 amazing stepkids. My partner puts up with me. We've got 11 cats.
No, you haven't.
Yeah.
You haven't got 11 cats. 11 cats?
11 cats.
You got any Manx cats?
We do have a Manx cat called Pickles, yeah. Yeah, he's a lovely little one. He's a bit of a creature. So yeah, no, everything's great. And Compton Vaults, I think when you look at like maybe divine intervention and stuff like that, when you notice that things are just falling into place, and you feel and you go with your gut a little bit, and your friends, like a lot of my Manx friends, were always very supportive of me when I had some tricky periods. They'd always come over to London and pick me up whenever I needed it and everything. And they just all sort of like clicked at the same time as I did, and it was just nice. It didn't feel like it was wrong. I suppose that's the best way to put it. And here we are.
I did my undergraduate, and then I went travelling, and I lived in Australia and Indonesia for a little while, and then I came back and did a master's down in Plymouth. And I think almost in my head I was like, I'll go back to the Isle of Man, save up some more money, and go away again. And I think there's something that's so amazing about the Isle of Man is the connections that you make with people, and how you can kind of put a thought out there, and suddenly you're meeting somebody who's connected to that area. So, for example, I met Fiona Gale, and we hit it off, and she was actually doing a lot of work on plastics at the time and got me in to do a little bit of work. And because we used to have the Marine Lab over here, the Isle of Man actually has an incredible network of marine scientists on the island, and also, some of the leaders in marine science across the UK and the world have Isle of Man-based connections. So it's actually a fantastic place to work in this field. And so once I started doing marine plastics, and then, other marine projects came up, and I kind of went from there, really. It wasn't really an intentional plan, but I'm incredibly glad that it worked out the way it did. I'm a believer in manifestation, or like putting an idea out into the universe, and it's hard to tell. I've lived here for a long time, so my networks are really strong, but I think there's something about living on the Isle of Man. You put an idea out into the universe, and I feel like it happens very quickly over here. So for example, my husband and I have been thinking about buying a bigger sailboat for a couple of months, just on the periphery of our ideas, nothing kind of solid. I spoke to a couple of people, and then they start looking for boats for you, and actually now we've been introduced to a boat that we're going to buy, and it's just amazing. And this lovely guy called Harry Owens is going to sell us his gorgeous boat. And those connections and those networks, I think, are really strong on the Isle of Man, and that's really special.
Well, when we came here, we didn't know a single soul. Not a soul. And the first thing that happened was we brought a furniture van across on the Ben Cree, and we hired a small house on South Quay, and it had a sort of stone archway to get through into the courtyard, and the van wouldn't go in. So we knocked on the next door's neighbour's house and said, do you know if there's any furniture removers, because we don't want to carry all this stuff in. And he said, I don't know, we'll have a look. And about 10 minutes later, these three madcap people turned up with brushes and mops over their arms and says, we're the men from Yellow Pages, we've come to help. And they introduced us straight away to a few folks and a few places. And the next morning, because we tried to get a settee and a bed up the stairs, but the way it was designed, it was impossible to get furniture up the stairs. Ian Sims had the auto electric shop just along the road, and I walked along and said, is it possible I could borrow your fork truck? Because we need to lift stuff up 1 story. He said, well, I'm afraid you can't because of insurance reasons, but I'll come and do it for you. And along he came with his forklift truck and spent an hour and a half lifting furniture through the door. Do you know, when you come to a place, it's a pretty good start, isn't it?
And was that very different to what you'd been used to when you lived in the UK?
Well, in North Northumberland, where I come from, it's like this, actually. It's very similar. The countryside's very similar. The people are very similar. But if you live in cities, I lived in Sheffield for a while, I lived in Newcastle and lived around the place. And it's never easy in cities. You never get the same rapport with people because there's a distance, isn't there? There's a natural isolation. But when I came here, it was a bit like being home, but on steroids. It was great. Just really loved it. And then we sort of, we moved down here, and we'd been away on our honeymoon, and we came back and bought this place, and it was a wreck. And that in itself led us to meeting people, just by people coming to help with the wreck, and joined the sailing groups down here. Jack joined the dive clubs, and slowly, you get to know a lot of people very quickly. It's all very friendly, so within no time at all, we had a real nice circle of people that we knew.
We take so much for granted. We are, unfortunately, somewhat entitled. We do feel that if there are no avocados, then, why aren't there any avocados? Well, excuse me, when I was a boy, we'd never even heard of an avocado. If I look how far we've come, and anyone of my age can say this anywhere in the British Isles, it is just extraordinary. If I could just go back and give you the timeline, in the 50s, we still had the tourist industry that was still almost at its peak. I remember everything was still running. There was a Punch and Judy show, there were donkeys on the beach, Russian Abbey, and all the other places were still running. White City, the fabulous Palace Coliseum Theatre, which is where the Palace Hotel now is, sat 2,000 people, and every summer they had the most fabulous variety show, the dancing in the ballroom afterwards, the coach tours, everything was still running, and we thought that's never going to stop. But of course it did, because people are always inventing things. They invented the aircraft, the flights to Spain, and all that gradually opened up, and our tourist industry declined, not through any fault of our own, but because people wanted to go abroad, and there was nothing we could do about it. We tried, the tourist board, all the rest of it. By the time we got to the 70s and the early 80s, our tourist industry was in a desperate state. I remember reporting the auction of a boarding house on Loch Prom in the 80s. You could buy one for £12,000 because the government refused to let the owners change them into holiday accommodation or self-catering because they said they're tourist hotels. But sorry, there is no tourist industry. But then something had happened in the 60s, and this is the story of the Isle of Man. As one door closes, another one opens, and you don't notice it at first. But if you go through it, you go to somewhere else. In the early 60s, the British government introduced surtax. Now, that meant if, after a certain income level, you earned £1, you paid £1.20 tax. Well, all the millionaires were outraged and they left. And Ronald Garvey, our governor, said, we're not going to introduce surtax. So all the millionaires started coming here. This was accidental. No one had any idea of setting up a finance sector, but the millionaires brought with them their advocates and their accountants because they needed to know about Manx law. It was different. And gradually, this whole sector blossomed. blossomed. And if you read this amazing book, No Man is an Island, by Roger Rawcliffe, it's a history of the finance sector. It's hilarious because in those early years, it was the Wild West. It was completely unregulated. Anyone who could sign their name could get a banking license. That is no exaggeration. And this came to a head in 1982 because the chairman of the Savings and Investment Bank could sign his name, and he did it as a party trick by writing 2 cheques at the same time with his left and his right hand. Well, of course, the SIB went bust spectacularly. People lost millions of pounds. And this is the interesting thing. The chairman of Executive Council at the time was Edgar Mann. Now, EXCO, as it was called, was the precursor to the Council of Ministers. There were no ministries, no council ministers. There was the Health Board, the Highway Board, the Harbour Board. All the chairmen of these boards got together once a week, and they were the Executive Council. So when the bank crashed, Edgar, who was the chairman, effectively the chief minister, went across the road to the Isle of Man Bank to ask for a loan, because at that time the Isle of Man had only £1 million in reserve. We could only run the island for a few days if something like this happened. So the Isle of Man Bank, the chairman, kept him waiting in the corridor. Edgar told me this. I interviewed him about it. Kept him waiting in the corridor, had a meeting of the board, and came out and said, "I'm sorry, Dr. Mann, but we've decided we're not going to give the government a loan because we don't think we should be underwriting failed banks." Now, if I was Edgar, I'd have said, right, I'm going to Barclays. And the irony of this was that, by tradition, the government's bankers always had one of its directors on the Legislative Council. And the previous year, they'd voted against more banking regulation. The point here is that we have dragged ourselves up from that period with £1 million in reserve to what we have today, which is, what, £1.6 billion in reserve? The Isle of Man is a success story. The infrastructure was broken in those days. Just look what we've done with new power stations. The Sulby Reservoir. We didn't need a reservoir for the current people in the late 70s, but there was a vision that we would need one for the future, and that was a massive civil engineering project. And our sewage systems and our water and all the things that we've done, it's incredible to where we are today. And we get up in the morning and we've got power, we've got hot water, and, you know, our central heating comes on and all the rest of it. And all this has happened because of really inspired decisions by politicians, some of them visionary, and really good civil servants. And, you know, we have a lot to be grateful for. It's an incredible success story.
Sometimes when I see the fallout of anything negative, I look at how many people have commented on this post, and I think about how many people live here. And then that just puts it all in perspective, isn't it? And it's the same people an awful lot. You can throw a stamp on them. If you think about it a little bit like that, and don't get me wrong, maybe some of the gripes are justified. There are things that maybe as a whole, we could be doing better. And there's some things that maybe attitudes could change towards some things, because maybe we're disconnected from mass communities, which can make some people feel a little bit different about some things. But I do just like to put it into perspective, and I look at the small numbers, really. It might look like there's a lot on a post, but there's so many more people out there that aren't wasting their energy talking about negative stuff. I think, there's 50 people there saying bad things. There's 78,000 people out there thinking good things.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I understand the frustrations that a lot of people are experiencing in the wider world as well as the Isle of Man. You know, we're kind of waking up to the realisation that the way that we're doing things isn't necessarily the best way of doing things. I think sometimes it's an easier route to blame and to criticise. I think in terms of how much energy it takes, it's much easier to point a finger and say what you're not happy with, rather than maybe looking at yourself and asking, well, what am I doing to make it better? I would like to think that social media is a small vocal minority. I've deleted Facebook and it's great. I just deleted the app, but every time I do have to go on there for something, it just feels like a really negative space. But I don't think it's really representative of the island community, because I think when I go out there and have conversations with people, it's not the way that we're communicating, and I don't think the way that people communicate on social media is the way that they would hopefully communicate in our community. And I don't know what's done that, or what gives people the way in which people kind of complain and be quite vulgar and very quick to try and take people down on there. And I just think it's bred this really negative space. And a lot of people talk to me about social media, and I think we're almost giving it too much power in the sense, and I think it's important to go back into our communities and have conversations with people and to understand where people are coming from. But yeah, ultimately I think we have to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, what are we doing for our communities? That's where community comes from. I feel like the Isle of Man loves being an island community, but I think we have to ask ourselves as individuals, well, what do we do to support that community?
Who would want to be a politician here when, you know, the sort of comments that are made against them are not just professional, they're deeply personal. I guess that most of the folks who are saying them wouldn't have the nerve to say them face to face to people. So we should, you know, maybe think about that before they go doing it. I think that we have to start to talk up the island and get rid of the negativity. And actually, you know, instead of criticising, get out and do something. Join a volunteer group. Go and pick up rubbish. It doesn't really matter what you do. If everybody volunteers to do something and helps to make the island better, maybe we can make this place just the best place to live on the planet.
Sorrows and on some lonely shore, I'll go back to Ellen Vanil, to my childhood days.